Kane here with the History Rats, and it's our 20th video. Woo, 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 woo. Celebrate, celebrate. Okay, anyway, so it's our 20th video, and decided to do a little something special. So we have story time with the History Rats coming up. We're going to put a little more history in the History Rats. So when we started uploading videos 8 months ago, our first video on Alaska, the city on and under the lake, it was more about history. We were there in Alaska in my sister-in-law's neighborhood, and I happen to know some history about that area because we lived there. So I was there, I did a video. I uploaded it on YouTube. At that point in time, the History Rats was it was still in its creation mode. It was still baking in the juices of our creative membrane. Okay, so when we started the Facebook, YouTube creation path, we started with VIP, or Virtually Investigating Phenomenon. I had a couple friends who wanted to get into paranormal investigation, and I'm kind of a cynic on that stuff. I mean, I am not firm on very many beliefs. I like letting stuff happen and learning about it. I do not decide who is right and who is wrong. I don't. It's not my job. But I created Virtually Investigating Phenomenon to do that, to investigate phenomenon. And being an English major, the writing part came pretty easy. I did a couple articles, but I really wanted to expand. I love history. The ghost stuff is very cool. I love Sarah Winchester and the Winchester Mansion in California. I would love to go there and see that, not just because of the really cool movie that they recently made, but because that house inspired Stephen King to write Rose Red and the Rimbauer Diaries, and literature is my passion. And so history falls into literature, and some of the paranormal falls into literature, but there's so much more, you know? So I created Dark History with the History Rats on Facebook. Why are we the History Rats? Because Johnny was Ratfink, and I was Trixie, and they happen to be rats, and it has history, so we are the History Rats. The Dark History with the History Rats on Facebook was mainly dark history. Marie Laveau, Catherine Delphine Lalaurie, the Goliad Massacre, dark history. Not just paranormal, although paranormal does fit in, but history that tends to be dark, because if you know history does tend to be dark, because, I mean, it's people, and people do stupid things throughout all decades and time frames. Okay, there are some sick and twisted things in your history book if you are willing to open it and read it. But when I started doing the YouTube videos, it was kind of out of my element. I am a writer. I write. Not so good at the video creation. I think I'm getting better. I have learned to edit. If you notice, my Onalaska video is one straight piece. The Palacios Grave Cemetery walkthrough, one straight piece. I think I have come a little ways. I can insert, I can add, I can put fancy words like the history rats right in front of you right now. I think I've come a long way. So, anyway, thank you to everyone who has come along with us on this journey from where we started, where it was just history, to where our family made this fantastic, life-changing page turn and started on the boat and the coastal and there's so much history just in the nautical alone. And that is what I'm going to show you today. Our 20th video is going to be historical. It's going to be nautical. It's going to be story time with the history rats. Check it out. And if you haven't already, like the video and hit that subscribe button. I see you watching the videos. Come on, just hit it. It's okay. It won't hurt you. Check out Storytime with the History Rats. Here we go. I would like to take a moment to point out that the opinions expressed in this video are mine and mine alone. The facts that I bring you, I found on simple Google searches. I found a lot of useful information in an article by Karen Abbott. But most of it was on the internet. But I would like to point out that I do not use Wikipedia because Wikipedia has a tendency of having bad information. As it is, when you're dealing with history, a lot of the time you're dealing with legends and myths, and it is hard to get factual information. Sometimes you have two stories for the same, like you have two editions of the same book, and one edition may be slightly different. Kind of like if you watch John Solo and Messed Up Origins, he shows you that there's this version, and then there's this version, and then there might be this version, but it's all the same story. So there are times that there are multiple options as to what happened. And I may have expressed what I thought happened along with the information that I found. But if you are interested in more information, I highly recommend you look up Karen Abbott and her article that she wrote for the National History Society, I believe, but don't quote me on that. But it is a good article. If there be a man among ye, Tale of the Pirate Queen. So check that out. Later. Welcome to Story Time with the History Rats. During the golden age of pirates, the 70-year span between 1650 and 1720, a number of sailors made a name for themselves as buccaneers, privateers, and yes, pirates. It was a man's world where women were known as bad luck. But was it really? There were a number of roles women could play on the open ocean. They could be servants, prostitutes, laundresses, and cooks. They could also be sailors, naval officers, whaling merchants, or pirates, although there were often less roles offered to them in that later capacity. Today, we're going to talk about two girls who took on the ocean and made it their own. Mary was born in 1685, somewhere in England. Her mother was the widowed wife of an English sailor. Mary's mother gave birth to a baby boy, and when her husband died or abandoned the family, depending on which story you're reading, the sailor's mother took pity on Mary's mother and gave money each month, basically child support, to help out the baby, and she agreed to do this until the baby was grown. Sadly, not long after the husband was no longer available to create children, the baby boy died. Mary's mother may have been, doing something, because she came up pregnant not long afterwards, and again, her husband was dead, gone, abandoned, whichever story you're listening to, and she still came up pregnant. So you tell me what she was doing. Anyway, she came up with this plot, and instead of telling dear old grandma the truth that baby boy died, in order to keep getting this money every month, she dressed little Mary up as a boy and paraded her around as her son, so that grandma's purse strings would still be open. And that is how Mary's young life started. It's not completely clear if grandma ever figured out the scheme that was going on, but either way, she died in 1697 when Mary was 12 years old. So whether she figured it out or not, the gig was up. Purse strings were closed. And you would think, well, now she doesn't have a reason to pretend like Mary is a little boy, but Mom kept pushing Mary to be a little boy because little boys could go out and do jobs. Like, they could get hired on in marinas as little line holders. They could work in fish markets. There were more opportunities for little boys than they were for little girls in the early 1700s, late 1600s. There were just more opportunities. When Mary was 13 years old, she joined the British Navy. Now, it's possible that she was press ganged, which is when they force you to join either the Army or the Navy. But it's also possible that she volunteered to join the Navy because it was income. And let's keep in mind, Mommy Dearest was having Mary dress up as a little boy to make money. From the time she was born, Mary was a boy to make money. So it makes sense that when she was 13 years old, they've had a whole year where grandma's purse strings is closed because grandma's dead and gone, and she's been having to make money as a little boy anyway. So it's completely plausible that Mary actually joined the Navy on her own. But because of the time, she could have been press ganged. Now, when she was in the Navy, her name was Mark. Mark, Mary, Mary, Mark. Ben is Glory? What? Sorry. Buffy. Bad Buffy joke. Sorry, my bad. Anyway, in my mind, if she had have been press ganged into the Navy, she could have at any point been like, hey, yo, I'm a chick. And they would have kicked her out automatically. No questions asked, because girls are bad luck on boats. We are. Girls, redheads, flat-footed people. It's all nautical superstitions that have been around for a really long time. So if it was the late 1600s and I've been press ganged into the Navy, I can be like, hey, yo, I'm not Mark, I'm Mary. Look at these. These kind of prove that I'm a chick and not a dude. And I would have been out of the Navy. So, in my mind, she volunteered to be in the Navy. Okay, so, I digress. Mary served as a powder monkey, carrying bags of gunpowder from the ship's hold to the gun crew. So, she'd lug these big old bags of gunpowder from one place to the other on the ship. Eventually, she left the Navy and went into the Army. She continued being a boy, but at some point, someone in her group found out that she was a girl. And there are some stories that say that he only kept her secret because he was interested in what was under her uniform. There are other stories that say that she wasn't into that. She was not a loose woman. But no matter which story you believe, they got out of the Army, they got married. Apparently, there were quite a few wedding gifts. Now, whether these were from people in the Army that were just curious about, hey, Mark is a chick. Let's go see her dressed up. Let's go see, kind of like a freak show, a little bit. Anyway, with the money they got out of the Army and the wedding gifts that they got, Mary and her husband started a bed and breakfast type thing in Breda, near the Netherlands. And they lived, a simple life, and they were happy. They were happy, but like so many stories, Mary couldn't have a happy ending. In 1717, her husband died, and she was all alone. And it was still early 1700s, not really easy for a woman to get a job. So, Mary turned into Mark again. This time, she moved to New Providence, which is now Nassau, Bahamas, looking for jobs. And she got jobs on boats. She'd do the same thing that she did in the Navy and in the Army. She worked as a man on these boats, and nobody was none the wiser. Now, let me tell you a little story about Anne. In the late 1600s, William Cormac was a successful planter in Kinsale, Ireland. He was a successful planter, but he was apparently not a successful family man. Because in 1697, his wife left him, and his family maid gave birth to his baby. The maid, Mary Brennan, gave birth to a little baby girl named Anne on March 8th, 1697. Now, we don't know if William's wife left him when the maid came up pregnant, when the maid had the baby, but at some point, she figured out what was going on and left his unfaithful ass. So, William spends some time with little baby Anne, and he decides, I kind of like the fruit of my loin. I'm going to move her in with me, and I'm going to move her mother in with me. But to avoid the scandalous gossip, he moved Mary in under the pretense that she was still the family maid, and he moved Anne in under the pretense that she was his nephew by some long-distant relative that sent their infant child to live with him, even though they never showed up, never made an appearance. They just sent their infant child to live with this long-distant uncle in Ireland. I don't really get it. I don't see why it was necessary for Anne to be a boy, because, gee, William, your wife just left you, you moved your young, pretty maid in, and this long-distance relative sent you their baby without ever coming to check on it, nothing. Did it really matter if the baby was a boy or a girl? I don't think so. Because I think everybody pretty much realized what was going on when you moved the maid in with you after the wife left. Anyway, I digress. At some point, the inevitable happened, and the little Irish community that they lived in figured out that the baby was his baby. And it wasn't a boy, it was a girl. And the maid was really the mistress. They figured it out. Dun, 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 figured it out. Anyway, so the family moved to South Carolina, to what is now Charleston. William provided for Mary and Anne, who, free of their small-minded Irish community, which I really don't think it was the community that was the problem. That's just my personal opinion, but free of their small-minded Irish community, Anne was able to live as a daughter to both of her parents. Unfortunately, in 1711, when Anne was 14 years old, her mother died, and William was left to raise his 14-year-old daughter on his own. There are reports that Anne exhibited a fierce and courageous temper. There were stories that the teenage girl would hang out at the local pubs. She would be seen drinking with the fishermen and fornicating with sailors. The word around town hurt William where it counted in the pocketbook. It was bad for business. When Anne decided to marry a poor sailor by the name of James Bonny in 1718, William had had enough. Can't have the fruit of my loin damaging the fruit of my pocketbook. So he disowned his 21-year-old daughter. Left on their own with no support from Daddy, Anne and James left the Carolinas and sailed to New Providence, what is now Nassau, Bahamas. James found work as a snitch. We use that word today, snitch. It was an actual occupation. An actual occupation. So, Governor Woodes Rogers, a former pirate, created a top 10 list of the most notorious outlaws, including Edward Teach, or as you may know him, Blackbeard. Although there are no snitches like James associated with the death of Blackbeard, known to have swam thrice around the ship as his head lay on the deck, people like him would hunt pirates and turn in their locations for the bounty that Governor Rogers had put on their heads. So he would go out, find out where the pirates are hanging out, and go back to the governor and get money for it. he wasn't actually man enough to go and capture the pirates and then collect the bounty. No, he just took their locations to the governor, and then they sent somebody else after him. He is just a snitch. Snitches get stitches, man, and wind up in ditches. Meanwhile, Anne is said to have spent her time drinking in local saloons and seducing pirates. According to A General History of Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates, written by Captain Charles James, written by Captain Charles Johnson, published in 1724, which is a few years after what we're talking about. Anne was not altogether so reserved in the point of chastity. In other words, girls slept around. Just saying. Maybe she got it from her daddy. I mean, her daddy did knock up the maid, so maybe it's a family trait? I don't know. A General History tells us James actually surprised Anne while she was laying in a hammock with another man. At some point, Anne met a young and flamboyant captain named John Rackman. Now, John Rackman went by the name of Calico Jack. He was called Calico Jack because of the fine silks that his shirts were made out of and the flamboyant colors that his coat was made out of. Calico Jack seduced Anne with tales of freedom and riches. Now, in all honesty, old Anne seemed to have been being seduced by a lot of people, so maybe it wasn't just the stories that got her going. I'm just saying. Anyway, I digress. Anne fell head over heels in lust for Calico Jack. She left James in New Providence and joined Calico Jack in both the captain's quarters and as a member of his pirate crew. That's right, because Calico Jack was a pirate. Although the crew most likely knew something was up between the young lovers, Anne usually dressed and acted like a man for appearance's sake. According to legend, she launched her pirate career with an illusion, using a mangled mannequin smeared with fake blood, and created a fake body that she threw on the deck while waving her cutlass over her head and screaming like a banshee. Scare tactics, which is mainly what pirates did. Together, Calico Jack and Anne were a fierce team who took a number of ships during their career. Hollywood would have you believe all pirates were bloodthirsty criminals. And okay, yeah, they were a rougher crowd who did make their money off stealing. However, it wasn't all sword fights and cannon fire. Most of the ships, I feel safe in saying a good number, really do, taken by pirates were surrendered out of fear. Most of the more notable pirates were very skilled in scare tactics. It was a show put on for their captors. Think about Blackbeard. He would put wax on the end of his beard and light it and put fuses coming out of his hat so that he would be this big man coming out with fire smoke coming from it everywhere. And it was a scare tactic. That's all it was. Most sailors who crewed these ships were taken by pirates. Most sailors who crewed the ships taken by pirates would be taken into the crew of the pirate ship. Although some sailors who had useful skills were reportedly forced to join the crew, a lot were swayed by the idea of bountiful treasure when they considered their sailor's wage. Pirates lived by a code. Booty was split fairly amongst the crew, the captain was put to a vote, and loss of limb was reimbursed. It wasn't as bad as it seemed. And the reimbursement thing, that's the real deal. Like, you lose your leg, you get so much. You lose your arm, you get so much. You didn't get so much for an eye, but you know. There are conflicting stories on how the good captain and his first mate, get it, discovered, oh shit. Calico Jack and Anne took one such ship sailing from the West Indies. Among the crew was a sailor called Mark Read, who chose to sail with the pirates. There are conflicting stories on how the good captain and his first mate, get it, discovered that Mark was really Mary. Some say Anne took a liking to the baby-faced new crewmate, and Mary only confided in her as she was being seduced. There goes Anne and her seduction again. Others say Anne was drawn to the only other girl on board without even realizing why, and when Calico Jack confronted the sailor in a jealous rage, Mary showed him her breasts to prove that she wasn't a threat to him. Look at these, I'm a girl. See? And you think she was press-ganged into the Navy. I don't think so. Anyway. Still, others would have you believe Anne and Mary, if not Anne, Mary, and Jack, had a sinful, blasphemous relationship on board their pirate ship. Fornication. Whatever the real deal was, Anne and Mary had a very close bond. They became a terrifying and fearless team. On October 20th, 1720, another ship overtook Calico Jack's ship. It is said that both Anne and Mary kept fighting even as their captain and crew surrendered. They weren't very happy about it neither. The crew were imprisoned and put on trial. Captain Calico Jack was found guilty and sentenced to death. Anne is reported to have said, "If you had fought like a man, you wouldn't have to hang like a dog." When Anne and Mary went to trial, they went together. They both pled by the belly. In other words, they said, "Yeah, we're pirates, but we're pregnant, so you can't hang us." And it worked. It actually worked. At the time of their capture in 1720, Anne Bonny was 23 and Mary Read was 35. The next year, on April 28th, 1721, Mary died in Port Royal, Jamaica. Not that long before there was an earthquake and Port Royal found itself at the bottom of the ocean. Not much is known about what came of Anne Bonny after her trial, but she is reported to have died on April 22nd, 1782, at the age of 84, 6 days shy of the 61st anniversary of her old friend and possibly lover's death. And that is how the cookie crumbles. Now you know. So, that's been Story Time with the History Rats. Thanks for tuning in for the story of Anne Bonny and Mary Read, and I guess a little bit about Calico Jack. But anyway, if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to our channel, check us out on Facebook, Dark History with the History Rats, and we'll see you next week. Later, guys. Be good to each other.